Hey guys, so today we're going to continue transformations of quadratic functions. And so we're just reviewing what we did yesterday and then kind of combining all of the transformations we looked at. So first here you have basically this is what our vertex form is. And we're going to look at each part of the vertex form and how that affects our parent function. Okay. So the first thing we have here is that negative sign right here. And so that negative, remember in front, is always going to tell us if there's a reflection. So we're just going to write reflection here. And I'm just going to abbreviate to reflect. Okay, this A value right here is going to tell us if there is a vertical compression or a vertical stretch. So a vertical compression or stretch. So if you have something being multiplied outside of the parentheses, that would be your vertical compression or vertical stretch. Now, if you have something being multiplied inside the parentheses, like this B value, that is when we have our horizontal compression or stretch. So horizontal compression or stretch. All right, so now if we have something that is added or subtracted inside the parentheses where this H is, that's when we talk about it being left or right. So translated left or right. All right, and then the last thing we have here is that K value. So remember, if you're adding or subtracting outside the parentheses, that's talking about your vertical shift. And if you're going up or down. Up or down. All right, and if you go to the next page, so on this next page, we have just an example of all the different transformations we've looked at. All right, so when we have something being added outside of the parentheses, if you're adding, that means you're going up. Okay, if you are subtracting something outside parentheses, that means you're going down. So you'll notice your vertex on these, they start at the origin, they go up 3 if you're adding 3, or they go down 3 if you're subtracting 3. If we are adding something inside the parentheses, so like this +3 inside, remember it's always the opposite when we're looking inside parentheses. So if our vertex starts here, we're going to move to the left 3 times this way. Okay, so if we are subtracting 3 in the parentheses, that means we're going to go, our vertex here is going to move to the right 3 units. And so now we can look at that vertical stretch, vertical compression or shrink, and the horizontal stretch and horizontal shrink. So the vertical compression and stretch, remember, if you are multiplying something outside the parentheses, that's vertical. So if your value is bigger than 1, like this 3, that means you're having a vertical stretch and it's getting narrower, like we see here. If we're multiplying something that's between 0 and 1, like this 1/3, this is going to be a shrink or a vertical compression. So that means your graph is getting wider. If we multiply something inside the parentheses, like this b value here, and it's a 1/3 inside the parentheses, that's something between 0 and 1. We call that a horizontal stretch, where it gets wider. And we say it's a horizontal stretch by a factor of 3. So remember, we always have to flip the fraction. If we multiply inside the parentheses by a number bigger than 1, that is a horizontal shrink or a horizontal compression, where the graph gets skinnier or narrower, like we see here. And lastly, that reflection, if we have a negative outside of the f of x, or the parent function, that means it's reflecting over the x-axis. The graph is going to open down. So this is just something good that you can have to reference as you do your examples today. All right, so now we're going to put it all together, all the transformations we've looked at. So we're going to be looking at how our parent function, f of x equals x squared, is transformed. So if we look at this first problem here, we have y equals 1/2 times x minus 4 squared plus 5. So as we go through the equation, the first thing we see is this 1/2. And this is a number I'm multiplying outside of the parentheses, which means it's going to be something vertical. Since it's a number between 0 and 1, that means this is going to be a vertical compression by a factor of 1/2. So as I move these little boxes away, you can just write this down on your paper. All right, so now we have this 4 inside the parentheses. So when I have a minus 4 inside, that means it's going to be some sort of horizontal translation. And it's always the opposite of what we think. So since it's a minus 4, that means it's going to be moving to the right 4. Then I have this plus 5 at the end. Because I'm adding 5 at the end, this is a vertical translation. Since we're adding, it's positive. That means we're going up 5. The next one we have is f of x equals a negative x plus 2 squared minus 11. So the first thing I see in this equation is outside the parentheses, this minus sign, the negative. So remember, if you have a negative outside the parentheses, this is when we have a reflection over the x-axis. All right, then we have this x plus 2. Okay, so this plus 2 inside the parentheses means it's a horizontal translation. Since we're adding 2, that means we're moving to the left 2. Then we have this minus 11 on the outside. So again, when you add and subtract outside the parentheses, that's a vertical translation. And since we're subtracting, we're going down 11. Okay, let's look at our next one. G of x equals negative 2x squared minus 8. So again, I have this minus sign. So when there's a minus sign or a negative outside the parentheses or in front of the x squared, that means we again have a reflection. Then I have a 2 being multiplied to that x squared. Okay, since it's outside or in front of the x squared, that means this is vertical. And since this is bigger than 1, that means this time we have a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. The last transformation on this equation is that minus 8. So since there's a minus 8 here, it's outside of the parentheses at the end of the equation. This is vertical translation. Subtracting, so we're going down 8. Okay, our next one, h of x is equal to 2x in the parentheses squared plus 9. So this 2 that we're multiplying to x, notice this time it's inside the parentheses. So when we're inside the parentheses, that means it's something horizontal, and we're multiplying. Since that number is bigger than 1, then we're going to have a horizontal compression. And remember, we always flip the fraction when we have a horizontal compression or stretch. So it's a horizontal compression by 1/2. Then at the end of this, I have a plus 9. So that plus 9 is outside the parentheses, which again tells us it's vertical translation. And since I'm adding 9, that means I'm going up 9. All right, our next problem is f of x equals 5 times x plus 3 squared. So the first thing I see here is this 5, and it's outside the parentheses and being multiplied. So if we look at our rules, we'll see that that means it's a vertical compression or stretch. Since 5 is bigger than 1, this is going to be a vertical stretch by a factor of 5. Then I have a plus 3 in the parentheses. In the parentheses means it's horizontal, and we are going to be moving to the left 3. All right, this next one. Inside the parentheses, I have x being divided by 4. That's the same thing as writing 1/4 x squared, okay? And that's in parentheses. So if it's in the parentheses, that means it's something horizontal, okay? And since that b value, what we're multiplying to the x, is less than 1 and greater than 0, or between 0 and 1, it's a horizontal stretch, and then we flip the fraction. It's a horizontal stretch by 4. All right, and the last transformation on this one is at minus 6. So again, if it's outside the parentheses, we're subtracting. That means it is going down 6. It's a vertical translation. All right, our last problem here says the graph of g of x equals x squared. So that right there is our parent function. So this parent function was transformed to create the graph of h of x, which is equal to negative x minus 2, x divided by 2, all squared, plus 4. Which of the following does not describe a transformation from the graph of g to the graph of h? So we're looking for which one is not true. Okay, so let's just do this by elimination. So answer choice A says a reflection over the x-axis. Reflection means there's going to be a negative sign in the front. If we look at our graph of h, there is a negative here. So that means A is not true because it is part of the transformation. Answer choice B says a vertical shift. So remember, vertical shift means you're adding or subtracting something outside the parentheses. In this case, we are doing that. We're adding 4 outside the parentheses. Okay, and the last two talk about horizontal and vertical stretches. Okay, so remember, horizontal stretch means that you're multiplying something inside the parentheses. Vertical stretch means you're multiplying something outside the parentheses. So if we look at our equation, you'll notice that x is being divided by 2 inside of the parentheses, which tells us this will be a horizontal stretch. So our answer here is C.